Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll make a start on the Aurora Sustainability Seminar Series. Thank you very much for coming here tonight on a fairly misty and rainy evening, but it's good to see a great turnout for the talk. This evening, this talk is a part of World Food Day, and it's in this time of global concern about impact and adaptation to climate change. The understanding of the impacts on food production are critically important, particularly for the global south. So as a part of World Food Day, this seminar is a part of a whole range of activities that are happening globally across 150 countries, ranging from hundreds of events, outreach activities, bringing together governments, businesses, NGOs, media, and the public to promote worldwide awareness and action for those who suffer from hunger and the need to ensure healthy diets for all. And you can look at this on Twitter, #ZeroHunger as well, which we'll be tweeting the event, and you can key into some of the activities that are happening today and over the next few days this week. Just before I introduce Adam, I'd just like to say that this network is this seminar is a part of the Aurora Sustainability Network series. So we're broadcasting this around to our 10 partner universities around Europe as well, so it's live. The Aurora Network, in case you've not heard about it, aims to promote cooperation, learning, mobility and activity across its 10 partners, of which the University of Aberdeen is a member. And this seminar is a part of the Aurora Network Sustainability Seminar Series. It's coordinated by the Aurora Sustainability theme. And in the theme, we're aiming to transform teaching, research, and the management of our partner universities to align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and essentially to place sustainability at the center of everything we do across the network. So it's my pleasure this evening to introduce Professor Adam Price. Adam's a chair in the School of Biological Sciences, and Adam's main research efforts are critically important, focusing around the production of sustainable rice production in the context of the need to feed the planet while improving the sustainability around water use and adapting to climate change. Professor Price is also really important for us. He's one of the leaders on campus in relation to climate change and working with students and staff on climate change. And Adam coordinates a fantastic series of events called Climate Change Perspectives. So do keep an eye out for when those events do come periodically on campus, and get engaged with those as well, bringing staff and students together across many disciplines to look at the impacts and addressing the challenges of climate change. So I hope you enjoy what's to be a fascinating seminar tonight, and over to you, Adam. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. So apologies first of all. I would normally like to do a talk standing up, but I've really done my back in, so I'm staying sat down. I have a feeling I actually partly did my back in at this event, because this was the school strikes and I was stood up for 3 hours, and I think that partly contributed to my back problem. Anyway, I was asked if I could contribute a talk in World Food Day around the theme of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's great for me because I absolutely adore talking about rice, which is what I'm going to talk to you about. But I'm going to put that into the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll say a tiny bit more about in a second, but essentially what they are is looking towards how we, as the people on the planet, improve the lives of everybody on the planet, in a way that is sustainable. In other words, it doesn't impact on the livelihoods of those that are going to come after us, like these young people in Aberdeen 3 weeks ago campaigning about climate change. So that's a sort of a context, and it's also within the context of this thing called Aurora, which is a fairly new network, which Aberdeen is partner of, and we'll see how that develops in the next few years. And a really big theme is sustainability and engagement, and engagement with students. So a lot of it is about engagement with students. So I'm going to tell you about 3 of these Sustainable Development Goals. But I suppose one of the things I would like you to appreciate is that, essentially any university, we are doing a lot of work which is addressing sustainable development goals, any one of these 17 sustainable development goals. And what we have to do as a community, both within Aberdeen University and within Aberdeen City and within the whole world, is coordinate everybody so that they're working together on these goals together. And that's really what Aurora is about. But I'm going to tell you about rice, and I'm going to tell you about 3 of these development goals. And I first want to put, as a plant biologist, I often have to justify my existence about why anyone cares about plants. And I can't, this is a decent way to do it. This shows you the population of humans on this planet on the top graph and where we grow our crops. And it is absolutely no coincidence that they overlap. It's not just because we grow food where the people are. Historically, it's absolutely the other way around. People are where the food grows. So foods are critical to civilization and to human thriving on this planet. And rice is the most important plant, which is what I tell all my undergraduates. I try to explain that in this. So this is showing you the quantities of a few different crops, both in the world and in Asia. So a few things to notice, right? The world's biggest crop is maize, not rice. But if you look at Asia, it's rice. In Asia, the most popular plant crop is rice. The important thing about rice that makes it different to any of the rest, though, is rice is a human food. Virtually all of the rest are used partly or extensively as an animal feed, or of course for barley in Scotland, used for making alcohol, not for food. So as far as food is concerned, rice is number one. And if any of you, rice is very important, not just for food, it's culturally very important. If any of you here own a Toyota or a Honda, you might be interested to know that Honda means main rice field, and Toyota means abundance of rice. So just to give you an example, that in Asia, where rice is the top crop, it's absolutely massively culturally important. So where is rice grown? This slide shows you just a map. A lot of it's grown in Asia, tiny bits in Italy, little bits in Africa and South America. Yeah, obviously there's nothing grown in Scotland, except our greenhouse. I always tell people it's the most northerly greenhouse in the world. But it's essentially a tropical crop, and it can grow in some temperate regions, like here, Japan as well, and in Italy, where they have a hot summer, where it can get really hot, and then they can grow it. But the rice system is a very different system to anything you would be familiar with if you grew up in the UK. And I just wanted to illustrate that with this slide. I absolutely love Google Maps. So I do this as just a spare time, just go down on a place in the world. But this is Inverurie, just outside Aberdeen. So you can see what a kilometre looks like. A field, it looks like you can get about 5 fields in it for a kilometre. And the crops growing there would be grass, wheat, maize, maybe potatoes. Compare and contrast. This is a field exactly to the same scale in Bangladesh. And there are 2 very, very obvious differences between those 2 pictures. One is the fields are much smaller, they're absolutely tiny by the scale we have. And the second one is they're virtually all, I would say 95%, maybe more, growing rice. Almost nothing else. So the other thing is I've got a few statistics for you up there. Inverurie, in Scotland, 64 people per square kilometre, and about 1 to 2% of the population are farmers. In Bangladesh, 1,000 people per square kilometre, 70% of the people grow rice. It may not be their main activity, but they'll be growing it. So rice is very important for people in some developed countries. So this connection with hunger is which I'll explain in a bit more detail, is really rather obvious. It's our critical food, and it's a food for very poor people. The connection with poverty maybe is a little bit harder to explain, but I'm trying to make it out by saying 70% of people in Bangladesh, for example, have part of their economic activity is growing rice. So I often quote this little book here, produced by, among other people, the International Rice Research Institute. I'll mention them later on. But they have this book that tells you some facts about rice, so I'll just give you a few. Rice, oh no, I should say, these people say, on the cover of their book, rice is the source book for the most important economic activity on earth. More important than car production, more important than oil production, because more people spend their economic activity making rice than any other activity. So it's the most important economic activity on earth. So rice, 10,000 years old. We've been growing rice for 10,000 years. There are over 200,000 cultivars. Cultivar is a scientific term. It means a cultivated variety. So there's more than 200,000 recognized different varieties of rice. 700 million tons of that a year. On average, a kilogram is going to cost about 50p. So the economic value, in the way that an economist at the World Bank might view it, the economic value is £300 billion a year. It uses a lot of water. This is important to what I'm going to tell you. It uses about 3,000 litres of water to produce a kilo. If I'd have brought a kilo bag of rice, I meant to bring a kilo bag of rice to show you. Imagine that is going to take 3 tons of water to produce that kilo bag of rice. So rice uses a lot of water. And the total rice requirement on this planet is 7 times the UK rainfall. I don't know if that means a lot to, I recognise that some people in this audience don't live in the UK, and some have only just arrived in the UK, but it rains a lot in the UK. So I think the entire rainfall, 7 times the entire rainfall of the UK, is an awful lot of water used to make rice. And for the extreme poor in Asia, rice purchasing can account for 1/4 of their daily expenditure just to buy the rice that they need to eat. So for the poorest people on the planet, their diet is often very heavily rice, and it's a big part of their daily expenditure. I want to talk about food security. This is the sort of concept that can the planet feed itself? All of the people, all of the time. Then if we can give people good quality, healthy food all the time, whenever they want it, wherever they need it, we have what we call food security. This graph tells you something about food security, because what it does is it shows you the trends in production of rice. This is tons of rice per hectare for different countries. So I'll stick them all on, because sometimes I have fun trying to get people to guess which country we're looking at. We don't have time for that. I'll put them all on, and I'll just say a few things about this. If you look at somewhere like China, which starts off at just over 2 and now is over about 7, 3.5-fold increase in rice production over that period. Because of that, they do not have tens of millions of people starving to death, which is what they did have in the 60s, because they have massively increased the amount of rice they get from each field. Same for India or Bangladesh, although they're still a little bit low. They started from a lower position and they still got some way to go, but there's still more than 2.5-fold increase in rice production for every field. And it's because of that that people are not starving to death. And that is the challenge of food security. We have to keep that graph going upwards. So the last one that's really interesting to me is Egypt. Because if anyone's ever been on holiday to Egypt, they might appreciate that Egypt is the perfect place to grow rice, because Egypt is a desert with, you could say, almost unlimited water running through it. So as long as you consider the Nile to be an unlimited resource, you've got everything you need for rice production. You've got good quality soil, but you've got all the water you need, and it's sunny all the time. So you can get, in Egypt, they get this thing which we call the yield potential. That's about the maximum you're ever likely to get out of a rice field, because the conditions are perfect. So the nice thing about that graph is it indicates that there is potential for, say, India or Bangladesh to go higher. But I do not want to decry the achievements that have happened in somewhere like Bangladesh. It's a brilliant success story where they have managed to increase their rice productivity. Rice is unusual, especially for someone who knows agriculture from a UK or even possibly a European perspective, because this is your classic view of what rice looks like. People transplanting rice, rice established in a field, and this is a lady irrigating rice. And what is unique about rice, almost unique about rice as a crop, is it loves to live in water. Most crop plants would die if you put them in that quantity of water, and that is exactly why they do it. Because if you can grow a crop that doesn't mind living in water, almost every other weed is going to die. So flooding a rice field is a method of weed control. I mean, I've heard people say the most important tool in the creation of a civilized society is the plow. The plow is a tool that allows us to control weeds. Flooding rice is exactly the same. It allows us to control for the weeds which would stop the farmer getting a high yield. But there's a problem. 75% of all the water that humans use on this planet is used to irrigate crops, and half of that is rice. So the irrigation of rice is a massive consumer of the humans or the world's water resources. So this paper just describes, it tries to look into the future and which countries of the world are likely to face problems in terms of the water availability, not just for the humans, but for the biodiversity as well. But places in red, like we do a lot of work in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh here in bright red, this is an area that's identified in which the water resources that they have right now are not sufficient, or at least they're going to put them in some peril for the future in terms of coping with population growth, climate change, everything you can think of. Places where water is going to be a big problem. For one of the reasons that is the case is that in many parts of the world, and especially for rice production, water use for rice is unsustainable. This is a photograph of a pump, electric pump used in Bangladesh to irrigate rice. This is, I love this diagram, but it's a little bit hard to explain it. But this is a map of part of just India, from a paper from Nature from 10 years ago, using data from a satellite. The satellite was put up there in the 70s, I believe, but that satellite is measuring the Earth's gravitational force. Using the data from that satellite, they can detect that the gravitational force of the Earth has dropped over northwest India, because they are irrigating their crops so much. The water table has dropped so much that it can be detected from space as a drop in the Earth's gravitational force. Absolutely unsustainable. Not everywhere is as bad as that. That is probably the worst case scenario, but actually if anyone likes Japanese rice, which is nearly all grown in California, utterly unsustainable in terms of water, where the water comes from. In places like Bangladesh, they're trying to address this issue by promoting this technique called alternate wetting and drying. So I want to tell you a little bit about that because our group, we do quite a lot of work on alternate wetting and drying, and this will be mentioned quite a lot in my talk. So alternate wetting and drying is a technique where a farmer puts this little pipe into their flooded rice field, and then they look down this pipe. This farmer is looking down the pipe, and it allows them to let the water level drop until it's about 15 centimeters below the water, and then floods it again. And this is a leaflet produced by the International Rice Research Institute in Bengali. Luckily, at the time in my lab, we had people who speak Bengali, could translate this for me, and actually one of the people is in the audience now, so because I cannot read Bengali, but it's been quite heavily promoted as a method of saving water. And we got a big project a few years ago now, especially me and my colleague Gareth Norton, who's also in my department, sort of coordinated this project, where we tested 300 different rice varieties in Bangladesh in alternate wetting and drying and continuous flooding. We had 2 years of experiments. It requires a massive team of people to sow these kinds of experiments in the field. And this is a picture of me. What that doesn't show you is how hot it is, because I think that's about 36 degrees at that time. It's very hot. But I'm not going to show you very much. I just want to give you a flavor of this experiment because it's a massive experiment. But one thing that's really nice about this experiment is this is the yield of these varieties. I've done a terrible sin. I've just realized I haven't put units on these axes. We tell our students never to put a graph without units on the axes. I have forgotten the units. Don't ever do that. This is, but also, the point here is that this is the yield under continuously flooded, and this is the yield under AWD, and this is the one-to-one line, and most of them are above it. It tells you that for most of these varieties, this water-saving technique actually increases yield. And in our experiments, we got about a 33% increase in yield. I have to say, not everybody finds this. This is very specific. Some people even find a reduction in yield, but generally AWD, alternate wetting and drying, doesn't impact on yield or slightly increases it. So it looks really quite good in that case. So this is AWD appears to be kind of a nice technique for making food, for food security, meaning that we can sustain rice production without using as much water. But I'm going to come back to it later, because I want to spend more time talking about number 13, UN Development Goal number 13, which is all about, well, it's about two things, and I'm going to cover both. It's about doing things now so that climate change doesn't get as bad, mitigation, and it's about what are we going to do because we've already started the process of climate change. So that's about adaptation. And I'm going to talk about both of those things in the connection of rice. So first of all, the effect of climate change on rice. What is going to happen? Climate change is happening. What will that do to rice? When I say climate change is happening, I call myself an environmental campaigner. I'm in an organisation called Aberdeen Climate Action. I stand on stalls in the middle of George Street trying to persuade people that climate change is real and we need to do something about it. But one of the best ways to convince people is just show them NASA's data. NASA are not an impartial arbiter on this. It's just data. Just data. This is the trend. More than a 1 degree increase in temperature already. Happened. This is some research that the International Rice Research Institute conducted on the subject of what will happen to rice if the temperature rises. So the International Rice Research Institute is part of a network of government-funded and donor-funded organizations which are looking at agriculture for the developing world. And they're based in the Philippines here. They did really nice experiments, and this is a highly reputable organization. Real high-quality science being done. They say 10% reduction in yield in rice for every 1 degree increase in the minimum nighttime temperature. Let me just pause there. It's not what happens in the day that's going to affect rice. It's the fact that the nights are going to get warmer. It's complex plant physiology to understand what climate change is going to do to our crop production. There are no simple answers. There are no simple predictions. You have to do the science to work out what's going to happen. And I suppose that's what I've been doing for years, is always writing grant proposals to get more money. As a scientist, you always want more money. But I want to convince you that research on climate change and what that's going to do to plants is always really important. But it's what happens at night for rice that seems to be the problem. And shockingly, from their data set, for that site, there's already been a 1.13 increase in nighttime temperature over a 30-year period. So, I mean, I put this up, scary stuff. I think that's scary stuff. Rice feeds the planet. So, and actually I come back to this because for the last, I have to say for the last probably 8 years, I've been showing this graph, which I made 8 years ago, and I only updated it last week, and I didn't realize that if you look at Egypt, Egypt has a downward trend. I'm not saying that that's because of temperature, but it really, really could be. We could be. I'll have to see if anyone can give me an answer to why there is a downward trend in Egypt, but it really, really could be that now the temperatures are getting too hot even for Egypt to maintain maximum yield. There are other explanations. Egypt is getting very worried about water use in rice production because Egypt is not the only country that wants to use the Nile and the water in the Nile. Sea level rise from NASA, 3.3 millimeters per year, right? I know that doesn't sound very much, 3.3 millimeters of sea level rise a year, but I just worked this out. I sat at my desk an hour ago. In my lifetime, that's the length of my hand, is how much sea level has risen in my lifetime. So it may be slow, but it's happening. It's got a really long lag time. So if we do something to change climate change now, it's still going to go on for a long time. This is a picture of the Nile Delta as it is right now, and this is a picture of the Nile Delta if there's a sea level rise of 1 meter. So that's what's going to happen by the end of the century if we don't do something about this. And almost a huge proportion of the rice that is produced on this planet is produced in deltas. So if anybody here likes, 1/3 of Bangladesh will be underwater. That will be 30 million people without a home. If anybody likes paella, anyone here like paella? Mostly grown on a delta, but not only problem is that delta is suffering from sea level rise, that delta is actually dropping. So the delta that grows rice in Spain is in real trouble. Okay, so that is sea level rise and temperature rise, but there's some other problems as well that are recognizable with climate change, and one of them is diseases, human diseases and crop diseases. What we anticipate is that as the climate warms, diseases are going to move north. And I want to tell you about this one disease called the root knot nematode. It's a major pest of tropical rice, and it's a major barrier to unflooded rice production. And this is the work of, mostly work of Roshi, who's from Nepal, who's been with us for a while. And this is a field that's been infected with this nematode, and you can get a very much lower yield. This is a map of where that countries in which, or locations in which this has been identified. And in some countries, especially in Asia, it's a really, really big problem. But what's really worrying is this, because It was first identified in Italy in 16, and it's spreading. In the 2 years since it spread, it's increased in the area tenfold. So let me just remind you what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a crop pest, which is described as a tropical pest, now being found in a temperate country for the first time. Entirely as we would expect the predictions of the movement north of pests and diseases because of climate change. It's particularly bad for Italy because every single variety of Italian rice is really susceptible to this, because they've never been bred to be resistant to it. So the interesting thing is, this is a little bit texty, this slide, but these nematodes in general, these are tiny little worms that they're so small you can't even see them by the naked eye. But they can be responsible for 20 to 30% of rice yield loss. And this particular nematode, this one called Meloida grammolecular, is the most important. The important thing about this nematode, okay, is it cannot live in an anaerobic soil. It needs oxygen. When you flood a field, you lose oxygen. So the nematode can't live there. But the rice is adapted to the flooded system because it provides oxygen to the root. So this nematode can live in a root because the rice is giving it oxygen, but it can't spread. As soon as you let the field drain and oxygen is there, this thing can spread. And it's thought to be one of the big problems, one of the reasons why, if you want to grow rice without flooding it, you will have to start rotating the crop. You won't be able to grow it year after year. There's an experiment in the Philippines, in the International Rice Research Institute, where they've grown 3 crops a year in the same field for 50 years. You couldn't do that in the UK. You get a build-up of all kinds of different pests and diseases. So water management and pests and diseases are intimately linked. And we are worried that this nematode could be quite a threat to any attempt to save water. So we've done this little experiment, quite a neat little experiment that was done last year. I want to explain it. So what we have in this experiment is we have 2 rice plants growing in tubes. So it's just like this. But one of these rice plants has been infected with this nematode, and the other one is not infected. And then they're transplanted into the tube. And we've got 3 different treatments. We've got continually flooded, we've got aerobic, and we've got alternate wetting and drying. And then we can easily just count the number of galls. That's these things. We just count these things on the roots. And what we find is in the flooded system, you get very few galls. In the aerobic system, just as we expect, you get masses of galls. Both galls on the plant that was infected, but also on the plant that's next to it, because they can move. And what's worrying is that in the AWD, where you cycle, you also get a lot of nematodes. This is worrying because our water saving technique could be challenged, compromised by something like this nematode. So we're doing a little bit more work on that. We've tested this thing called the Rice Diversity Panel. The Rice Diversity Panel comes from across the world, 340 different rice varieties. This guy, Stanley, has tested all of them in an absolutely massive experiment. And just to cut you a long story short, what he's really excitingly found is he's found 2 varieties which are completely resistant. So this variety called LD24 and this one called Cowpox Mao appear to have absolutely no galls when we do our very simple lab experiments. And 2 cultivars, that's not supposed to happen because people have been looking for this for years. So we're very excited about this. Rice variety, this is Asian rice variety, which is resistant. So those have been tested in the field in the Philippines. So this is not my data, someone sent me this data, but those varieties, because we told them that these look resistant, they checked that out in the field. So this is experiments in the field, and it's confirmed in the field. These things are resistant. And I'm not going to go into any detail, but some of the things that make what I would do, I'm a geneticist, so I'm interested in genes. One of the things that makes that really exciting nowadays is that we can do things like DNA sequencing. So we've used DNA sequencing. This is a genome sequencer for a relatively small amount of money. I would say probably about £6,000, okay? So for a geneticist, that's a relatively small amount of money. I know you could buy a new car with it, but a relatively small amount of money. We can sequence that. And that's allowed us, we've made crosses, we've sequenced the crosses, and that's allowed us to identify on chromosome 11, this is very complicated, but the bottom line is, this is a collaboration between ourselves and the University of Ghent. We've identified a resistance in both of those cultivars to a part of, one part of a chromosome. And we can use that in breeding. So now if we're worried about that nematode, we can start to use that in breeding so that they can be more resistant. So that's a little bit about the effect of climate change on rice. I want to say a little bit about the effect of rice on climate change, the other way around, because rice is really important in that sense. Maybe I should have done that first. So this shows you some data from this paper here about what does agriculture in China do to global warming. So what you've got here, you can't read this, but this is a whole load of different products on this axis, agricultural products. And on this axis is what they call climate forcing, essentially the equivalent of CO2 production for each different item. Now, you can't read this, but this is all the meat. This is pork and beef and mutton and chicken and eggs. They're massive. All right? This is wheat and corn and soybean, and this is rice. So rice is bigger than wheat in China. And this is what this means in a typical Chinese diet. 37% of the typical Chinese diet, the contribution of the diet to greenhouse gas production, 37% of it comes from meat and 30% of grain. I wish I could tell you the same for the UK. It's going to be massively dominated by meat in the UK, more so than in China. But as we know, in China, the meat part is growing. What we need to do in the UK part is make the meat part shrink. So that's the story in China. This is very similar. Again, another graph you can't see. But this is taking a global data set, showing a similar axis. This is the greenhouse impact of different food productions. So we've got pork here, cheese here, lamb and beef top the scale. We've got cereals here, and we've got rice here. Again, the same story. Rice is about 3 times more impactful on climate change than other cereals, similar cereals. So I want to explain why. Okay, and just to put that into perspective, agriculture accounts for about 10% of human activity in terms of warming the planet. A beautiful piece of research done by the Climate Research Group in Aberdeen really did pioneering work on measuring the impact of agriculture on greenhouse gas production. They did this beautiful piece of work which puts some numbers on some of the activities. So what I want to cite, so these are all the sort of agricultural activities that contribute to greenhouse gas production, and they're putting numbers on the megatons of CO2 equivalents produced. So one of them is specific to rice. You can't read that, but that says methane production. If you've sort of ever heard of marsh gas, the idea is if you flood a soil and it becomes anaerobic, then it will produce methane. There are microbes in the soil which will produce methane. If you flood a rice field, it will produce methane. That methane that is produced on a flooded rice field contributes about 1% to global greenhouse gas production. So it's unique amongst crops. But also, rice needs a lot of fertilizer. This is an amazing one. Almost none of you will probably be aware that when you throw fertilizer onto any field, some of that fertilizer comes off as N2O, also known as laughing gas. It isn't produced in anything like high enough quantities for you to get a hit out of. So there's no point kneeling down on a freshly fertilized field in the hope that you will achieve that. But it is massively important in terms of agricultural greenhouse gas production. And finally, just the energy used in irrigation. So if you're thinking about rice, all of these things are important in rice production, and especially some of these are unique. The irrigation, the methane are unique to rice. And rice is actually really bad at using nitrogen, so rice is very poor in all of these. But the good news is, I'm going to come back to alternate wetting and drying, and I'll just show you some data from an experiment we've done in Italy. This is an experiment where we have 12 European cultivars grown in conventional flooding and alternate wetting and drying. And we can measure greenhouse gas production from that system. And the nice story is, if you have alternate wetting and drying compared to permanently flooding, you get something like 50 to 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Both N2O and methane combined, the reduction is less. So that's a really good story. AWD will reduce the greenhouse gas production. Now, how am I doing for time? I've got one more little story, just about time. One more little story, because I said in my blurb I would say something about good health and well-being. So I want to, I know actually I should apologize, I've already scared you a little bit, because I'm saying there are some problems about food production. I think AWD is a really good story, and I will end up on that. But I want to give you another little scare, but please don't get worried. I want to tell you about arsenic. Research on arsenic has been a really big theme for Aberdeen. Research on arsenic in rice has been a big theme for Aberdeen. And it all starts actually from my colleague Andrew Mahag, who was an expert in environmental arsenic. Sadly for us, he's gone back to his native Belfast now, but he was here, and he was the first person who started research that showed that rice is very good at taking arsenic out of a field. And if you eat a lot of rice, and that rice comes from a place that's got a lot of arsenic in the soil, you could be getting quite a bit of your arsenic from rice. This shows you a plot for different countries of the amount of arsenic that they have. So, for example, Bangladesh has a range from, this is, you can't see the scale, 0.2 to 0.1 to about 0.3. That is a scale in Bangladesh, and you can see this is Egypt. So Egypt, almost no arsenic. India, almost very little arsenic, but in Bangladesh, a lot higher. This red line is a limit that Chinese government have put on for the importing of rice. No rice over that red line can be imported into China because they consider it bad for health. Most of you don't have to worry, okay? I've known this now for 15 years. It absolutely has not stopped me eating rice, because I eat rice 3 or 4 times a week. But if you ate rice 3 times a day, like I know some people in this audience might do, and you got your rice from some places in Bangladesh, you might be a little worried. I won't show you that, but I mean, if you were a different audience of geneticists, and you'd spent the last 10 years becoming experts in genetics, I could get you very excited about this, because we're now discovering genes within rice that we can use to lower the amount of arsenic in the grain. And it's one of the things that getting us really excited. But I don't have time to explain that to you. But I can give you one more piece of information from this experiment from Vercelli, from Italy, for example. This shows you the amount of arsenic in the grain in the continuous flooding in the AWD in the two years in which we've done that experiment. And in every experiment we ever do, AWD reduces the amount of arsenic that you get into the grain. That's because it changes the form that the arsenic is in the soil. When it's flooded, it's a form called arsenite, which the plant can easily take up. When it's unflooded and oxygen reacts with the arsenic, it becomes arsenate, which is much more difficult. So if it's not flooded all the time, the arsenic goes down. So that's more or less where I finish. I've told you about all of these some of the sustainable development goals within the context of rice, and I've talked. I promised I would talk about poverty and hunger and climate change, and I've added one for good measure. AWD looks absolutely marvelous because it reduces water use, it reduces power use, it reduces methane emissions, it reduces arsenic. In actual fact, you could ask yourself, why on earth aren't people doing it? Is it even better than that? It reduces mosquitoes, so it reduces malaria risk. The reason they don't do it is beyond my pay grade. I'm a scientist. The reason they don't do it is socioeconomics. It's about incentives to reduce water, the financial incentives. It's very, very complicated. But that's another story. If we want to employ AWD, we certainly need to do more research on things like nematodes, biological problems in soils which flooding removes. We've got to study those biological problems which might occur if it's not flooded all the time. And that's my final slide. My motivation, really, in the times when I find life difficult, like my back is killing me, or my grant has been rejected, or my paper has been rejected, or whatever reason, I remind myself that what I'm trying to do is help people who live in countries like Bangladesh, where a lot of the people are poor, they're farmers. If we can improve rice production, we'll help them. And we can do stuff that will mean that their food security is maintained, and we could even make their rice more healthy. Thank you.
Thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk and an accessible talk, and a visually really compelling talk as well, and a concerning talk. We have some refreshments on at 7:30 for everybody, so you can stay and chat and talk about rice and climate with Adam. We do have time for some questions and discussion up to that point. If you do have a question, we'll ask you to just put on your microphone on your desk. There's a little button that says speak, and your red light will come on. You can feel like a parliamentarian and throw it on and have a question. So any questions from the audience? So, Charles.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for a really interesting talk. It's absolutely fascinating. You talked about, in your title, you mentioned the idea of resilience, sort of resilient rice, and you talked about the impact of climate change on rice. Could you speak more to the impact of climate change on rice producers, looking at their resilience? Is it forcing them out of rice production? Is it actually affecting their socio-economic status?
I wish you hadn't asked me that question. That's a terrible thing to say to the first questioner. But as I kind of hinted at, and actually it is probably the most important question. So I don't really mean that, right? But it's part of the challenge of growing up as a scientist. Okay, my training is in the science, and one of the things you have to learn, and it's a pleasant experience, but it's a difficult experience, is that the science you do has to be put into context, the socioeconomic context, and it's sometimes very difficult because you can get really excited about things like genes and sequencing and stuff like that, but you need to ask the question, so what? So the simple answer to your question is that's a question to put to a socio-economist, but it's a really good question because I mustn't ignore that question. I must try and put it into context. What I do know for sure is that, you could say some simple things like, why don't these people, say it's going to get a bit drier, why don't they stop growing rice and grow sorghum? Because sorghum will grow quite happily on much less water. But people don't want to eat sorghum. They don't like it. They want to eat rice. So in many cultures, right, if you go round to their house as an invited guest, they might be eating sorghum or millet every day, but when you arrive, they'll give you rice, because rice is their premium product. It's what they really want. So it's deeply embedded in socioeconomics and culture and stuff, which I just sort of escape the answer by saying it's not what I work on.
Thank you. It's a really interesting answer.
I think it just raises the challenge for genuine multidisciplinary research, working across boundaries, across scientific boundaries. I'm a social scientist, but I unfortunately work on coastal and marine systems. So, but often we're talking about climate change. The cultural and the economic and the political factors are as much about how we solve these problems as it is getting the science right and working very closely together in a multidisciplinary way. It's a big challenge. Another question? Down the front here. Speak is the button. It says speak. A little black button on the bottom, on the bottom right.
Oh, yeah. You were talking, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting to listen about rice production. My question is, you're talking about the diseases that are spread to Italy from tropics, and could you explain how it happened? So how you said that it's due to climate change, but how exactly?
Right. Okay. So I suppose most biological organisms have a niche, a range in which they are happy to live, so there is an environmental window in which they can live. What climate change is doing is moving that environmental window northwards, mostly. For them to move into that window, of course, they have to have a transport mechanism. There's got to be a mechanism by which they get there. And in terms of moving things from Africa to Italy, like rice, it's not very difficult. With a lot of pests, it is actually the international trade in crops that spreads it, human activity. But I suppose for something as simple as rice, it could even be birds moving and dropping seeds across the Mediterranean. But that concept that there are windows is massively important for Scottish agriculture, for example. I mean, when I first came to Scotland, I learned that the carrot industry is really important in Scotland simply because, and the potato industry simply because the soil is so cold in the winter that most of the big pests can't overwinter. And as climate change increases in overwintering soil temperatures, carrots and potatoes, for example, really could be much more challenged to be big industries in Scotland.
Hi, I wonder if you could say something about the scope to expand rice production. So we hear a lot about people moving to plant-based diets, vegan, vegetarian diets. So if people are going to move away from meat consumption, what is the capacity for rice production in particular to grow?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure anyone's ever asked me that before. I mean, most countries which are worried about food security in terms of rice production in Asia are maxed out. I mean, I certainly know from Bangladesh is maxed out. And I'm saying that as much from traveling around the country as anything else, because if you go to Bangladesh, you'll see almost every little square has got rice in it. There's almost no land. There are some cricket pitches, aren't there, Partha? There is space for cricket pitches. But, you know, in a country like Bangladesh, their solution is not bigger area, it's bigger yield. Now, that is not true for Africa, for example. Some countries in Africa are massive importers of rice, And they recognize that for their food security and their balance of trade, they ought to grow more rice. And they can do it. They have the space. So in Africa, for example, there is the capacity. You don't need, it's not actually for Africa or say Brazil, it's not the space as much as the irrigation infrastructure. Some of those systems, it's an amazing thing. Has anyone ever been to Sri Lanka? You see a civilization, you see a system of tanks which store water, supplying water through irrigation channels, which is 1,500 years old, in which they were supplying an immense civilization through an irrigation system of rice production. Infrastructure is required for that irrigation, so it's area is needed, but also infrastructure. And that's why when you see that graph of climate risk, water risk, many countries in Africa are at risk, not because they don't have the water or the land, they don't have the infrastructure to use it. And that's where sustainable development could be massively beneficial and really pay dividends. That's why I suppose a lot of emphasis on Africa. There's a lot of potential. Yes, question here.
Thanks for your excellent presentation. Now my question is, I'm wondering, how did you find the nematode, right? Or is there any other fungus affecting the rice yield?
How
did you find the nematode? The
nematode
disease?
resistance?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I mean a really exciting observation for us is the identification of 2 nematode-resistant cultivars. The reason we found it was, I'll just tell you the historic story. When I came to Aberdeen 21 years ago, one of my colleagues was an expert in nematodes, plant pathogenic nematodes. We had a joint PhD student who looked at nematodes and rice. So we started that 20 years ago. And that stopped after a short while. And then I had another student came from Nigeria, said he wanted to work on nematodes, so we picked that up again. And so that's how sort of research moves often. You do bits of research when you have the manpower or the money to do it. But so in a way, it was a little bit luck. We were not expecting to find 2 resistant, but the way we made our luck work on our side is we screened so many, and they were from a well-created diversity panel, which was made by collaboration with the International Rice Research Institute and Cornell University. We had nothing to do with creating that panel, we just tested that panel. But it was a well-constructed panel, had diversity from around the world, and it was a big panel. And Stanley, the guy who did it, he spent months and months looking at roots, and he got his children to help him as well, which I probably shouldn't tell you.
Time for one more question. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam, for the talk. And you mentioned genes which would indicate like the arsenic uptake of plants. So I was wondering if there is the possibility, or where do you see the possibility of looking at genes and associating it with nutritional qualities, so like iron or something? Is there future possibility of connecting genes and nutritional content of plants?
Yes. Yes, but it's difficult. So the nice thing about that nematode story is that our evidence suggests that it's a single gene. The way it works in genetics, right, is you have a gene that affects some trait, and you'll have 2 alleles of it. So the resistant one will have one allele, the susceptible parent will have another allele. And in that nematode story, if you inherit the resistant allele, you'll be resistant. So it's a simple system. When you're talking about nutritional quality like the arsenic, I actually showed the slide. It showed 6 different genes or locations of genes which we think affect arsenic. And that's just the best 6. We truly think that the amount of arsenic that differs widely between rice cultivars is determined by many genes. And it would be the same for iron or zinc. Iron and zinc in human nutrition is very important. And if you have especially if you have a lot of cereal in your diet because you're poor, you often don't get enough iron or zinc. So identifying genes which could increase the amount of iron or zinc is a really important target. And it can be done, but it will be slow. And we are starting that. We hope to collaborate with the James Hutton Institute in Dundee to do exactly that, comparing rice and barley to see if we can't find the same genes in rice as in barley, which make more zinc.
Would like to take this opportunity to thank Adam for an absolutely fascinating and brilliant talk on climate change and rice. So just a round of applause to thank Adam. We'll continue the conversation out in the lobby with some refreshments. Thank you to Adam for giving the talk. Thank you for coming, and thank you for those of you online around the Aurora Network, Universities Network across Europe who have tuned in to this event. Do keep an eye out for more Aurora activities. We're really keen to hear from students to get engaged in the Aurora Network activities. The sustainability seminar series will be going for the next 12 to 18 months. You can expect regular talks on the SDGs, both from Aberdeen and also from our Aurora Network partners, which you can log into from the comfort of your desk. So please get engaged in that. And also do keep an eye and an ear out for the climate change perspectives events as well. It's really good to have staff and student engagement in those talks as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you outside.